Good day everyone, I am Hannah Jenny Hemio from BSED 1A. So now, we will gonna discuss about language and gender. This chapter examines language and gender by first distinguishing gender from sex. It then addresses gender inequality in language, focusing on the use of the generic he and other lexical items that portray women less favorably than men. The chapter also explores differences in men's and women's speech, including gossip, and consider claims about whether women talk more than men. Finally, it examines how gender identity is performed through language and its relationship to sexuality. So now, what is gender? Please read. Gender, then, is not something a person has. It is something they accomplish through their behavior, clothing, habits, and speech. Scholars often characterize this as performing gender. Talking about gender allows an understanding of people's behaviors in nuanced and detailed ways. And while it is true that a wide range of genders and gender performances are available, this does not mean they are all understood as equal. We will see that there are certain expectations of people according to biological sex. Very often, however, in reality, people don't always conform to those expectations. The gender norms in society generate conventions that people are judged against. It is of course possible not to conform to these gender expectations, but there are often consequences for the individuals who do this. This we'll see through our exploration of gender and language that inequality is an important factor underlying the linguistic patterns we find. Inequality at a lexical level. Consider the meaning of the following pairs of words. Please read. What does each pair of words refer to? Does each of them refer to exactly the same thing? There are a few differences between the terms showed referring to men and the equivalent terms for women. If we consider the differences between bachelor and spinster, while both mean unmarried adults, these terms represent different types of unmarried adults. If we consider how these terms are used, it becomes apparent that bachelor is positive while spinster is negative. The difference between bachelor and spinster and terms similar to this can be discussed in terms of lexical asymmetry, because terms that are met, it referring to equivalent positions for women and men, are not actually used in the same way. A term is marked when it has a relationship with a seemingly neutral and generic counterpart. For example, actor referred to as an unmarked term because it refers to a male and actors in general. Actress, however, refers only to a female actor. By having a different form to indicate only a female actor, it is marked. In the context of gender, we find that terms referring to men are generally unmarked and considered neutral, while those referring to women are marked for sex. Similar examples are prince and princess, waiter, waitress, host, hostess, and so on. Asymmetry is found in other domains too. Example, female, Miss and Mrs., male, Mr. While women's title indicate their marital status, the most common title available to men is Mr., which provides no information about this relationship's status at all. Occasionally, Master will be available for males, although this tends to be restricted to young boys. The difference between Miss and Mrs. is straightforward. Miss means an unmarried woman and Mrs. signals that the woman is married to a man. The meaning of Miss, interestingly, is rather more consistent. It was initially proposed as a replacement for both Miss and Mrs. So that women, like men, would have only one title that didn't refer to marital status. As often happens with words, Miss has taken on a range of other meanings according to the way it is used and how people understand it. Sexism in word order. In the majority of cases of personal binomials, Mott-Chen-Batcher 2013 found that the male form comes before the female. The instances where this does not occur are domains that are considered feminine, especially parenting and children. This tells us that there are some fields that belong to women. Semantic derogation. Further example of sexism, and especially gender inequality, can be seen in cases of female derogation. Semantic derogation refers to the process by which a word comes to have negative meaning over time. Example, please read. Differences in language use doing being a woman or a man. Lack of use that women's language is characterized by a number of features including the avoidance of swear words, the use of hedges or fillers, sort of, the use of tag questions, empty adjectives, intensifiers, specific color terms, more standard syntax, rising intonation, undeclaratives, and high levels of politeness. Lack of 1975. However, nearly 40 years later, if we understand Lacov's features are as typifying a kind of ideal woman against which real women are measured, the list continues to work well. In this way, Lacov features provide us with an account of what people expect from women in their language use. An important feature of the concept, women's language, is not there actually. Is a way that men and women use language differently, but that society expects them to do so without questioning these expectations. Tag questions. Lakov identified tag questions as part of women's language, 1975. Women's use of tag questions was interpreted as expressing uncertainty and the lack of confidence. Linguists started researching tag questions in order to establish whether women use them further than men. In the process of doing this work, however, they also discovered that tag questions have more than one function. Modal in this context refers to the amount of certainty the speaker is expressing, while affective tags signal the speaker's attitude to the addressee, or even the topic being discussed. People use tag questions to express uncertainty, but they also use them to invite another person to speak, or to signal that what is being discussed or said is sensitive. Research shows that while women use more tag questions, they are more likely to be affective tags that facilitate conversations. Holmes, 1985. In Holmes' research, more than half of women's tag questions were of it type. In contrast, the majority of tag questions used by men were modal. That is, they express uncertainty. In fact, tag question can have even more functions if considered in conversational text. Depending on the context, this might be a way of inviting a shared appreciation of an attractive woman or a way of expressing displeasure at the wandering eye of a boyfriend. The analysis of that question shows that while a linguistic form may have a conventional function, it may have other functions too. Therefore, we must be very careful about making claims about what use of a tag questions means. Holmes, 1986-1987. Gossip. Gossip usually refers to a talk about other people. It is often considered to be meaningless, unreliable information, and sometimes even malicious. In popular discourse, gossip is particularly associated with talk that women engage in with other women. Deborah Jones defines gossip as a way of talking between women and their roles as women. Intimate in style, personal and domestic in topic and setting. According to Jones, gossips is something that women do with close friends, often in their homes or other private settings. While Coates argues that Jones' claim that gossip revolves around women's roles as wives, girlfriends, and mothers is too strong. This kind of talk allows women to explore and negotiate what it means to be a woman in a variety of contexts. Linguists have taken up gossip as a legitimate object of study and found that first, gossip is a very complex form of communication, and second, both men and women equally engage in this form of communication. Gossip and men. Earlier in this chapter, we considered women's talk or gossip. This is not usually a form of communication associated with men, but that doesn't mean they don't engage in it. Cameron's data shows a male discussion that contains more than simple. Features of men talk. The idea that men are competitive in conversation comes from how they often manage speaking terms. Men are said to be perfect a one at a time floor, meaning only one person speaks at a time. Because holding the floor, having the chance to speak without interruption, is valued. Speakers may compete for it. Men are also believed to show that they are listening by staying silent rather than giving frequent verbal responses. In contrast, women may interpret silence as a sign that communication is fading or that the listener is not engaged. For men, however, silence is generally seen as normal and acceptable in interaction. Gender and power. The androcentric rule means that men's language is treated as a standard or norm, while women's language is seen as different or unusual. According to Cults 2004, when women use language in certain ways, their speech is more likely to be judged negatively. In contrast, when men use language in similar ways, it is usually seen as normal and acceptable. This is why men's language is described as unmarked, the default, while women's language is marked, noticed, evaluated, and often criticized. These rules reflect a broader concept called linguistic subordination. Lippy Green, 1997, explained that the language of socially less powerful group is often judged as inferior compared to the language of dominant groups. Wolfram and Chilling Estes, 1998, add the society tends to interpret the speech of subordinate groups as linguistically inadequate, not because it truly is, but because of existing social power differences. In simple terms, people judge language based on who is speaking, not just how they speak, and groups with more social power set the standard for what is considered normal language. Do women talk more than men? The idea that women talk more than men is very common across cultures. Proverbs and sayings often criticize women for talking too much, which shows how society judges women's speech. However, instead of relying on stereotypes, linguists argue that we should examine real language used and the social reasons behind it. Doing this helps us understand how language, power, and society are connected. An important point in deciding who talks more is recognizing that there are different types of talk. Not all talking serves the same purpose, so counting who speak more without context can be misleading. One key factor is where the talk happens. There are two main domains of talk. Public talk happens in settings like classroom, meetings, politics speeches, or debates. Its goal is usually to inform or persuade, and is closely linked to status and power. People are often invited or given permission to speak, and historically men have had more access to these speaking rules. Second, private talk occurs in personal settings such as conversations with friends or family. Its purpose is social and relational, such as building friendship, sharing feelings, and maintaining relationships. Because men and women may participate differently in public and private talk, the belief that women talk more often ignores context and power structures. When women may speak more in private setting while men dominate public talk. Therefore, the question is not simply who talks more, but where, how, and for what purpose people talk. The study shows that women do not need to actually dominate the discussion to be perceived as doing so. In the online discussion examined by Hearing et al. 1998, men contributed more overall. Yet some men felt silent when women's participation temporarily increased. Analysis found that little evidence that women were hostile or dominating. This supports Spencer's argument that women talk is judged against an expectations of silence rather than against men's talk. Because public talk is culturally seen as a male domain, increased participation by women can be perceived as domination even when it is not. Gendered talk performing identity. Dude. The word dude is interesting not just for what it does in conversation, but for the type of relationship it expresses between speakers. When people talk, they use language to show how they feel about the relationship, and terms of address, like sir, honey, or darling, are key tools for this. Kissing argues that dudes signal solidarity and friendship, but in cool, relaxed, and non-emotional way. This matters because social norms for heterosexual men discourage showing too much emotional closeness, especially with other men, since it may risk being interpreted as homosexual. Using dude allows men to balance this pressure. It expresses closeness and camaraderie while keeping enough emotional distance. In this way, dude helps men show friendship without violating expectations about masculinity and heterosexuality. In summary, this chapter has explored key issues in language and gender, showing that gender inequality remains a significant issue in modern society and that women generally hold lower social status than men. This imbalance is reflected in beliefs about how much men and women talk and who is entitled to speak in different situations. Although there are claims that men and women use language differently, they also share many similar linguistic practices such as gossip. Overall, variation in language use are better understood as a result of social expectations about gender performances rather than innate differences between men and women. Because identity, especially gender identity, is complex and socially constructed, it will be examined further in the chapter that follow. Bye!